now that we finished the passage 1 questions, we're going to move on to the passage 2 questions. The point I want to make in this episode is, with a question like 41, for example, no line reference, we have to provide the line reference in 42. The authors of passage 2 indicate that the matter of shrinking biodiversity should primarily be considered what? Again, stressing this because it's so important. If you've read through this whole passage and you just don't know, like you don't remember, you don't know what the answer is to 41, go back and look again, because there's got to be something in the text that tells us what the answer is. It's almost like we talked about with word search, right? You got to look through the passage. The answer is there. The challenge is finding the evidence for the answer and being able to decode it and then pick the choice that matches it. But it's there. Trust the passage, trust the text, trust the process, because it's there. So let's look at 41. By the way, as always, we look ahead, we see that this one's going to be some sort of probably specific question, but we'll see. 43 is very specific. 44 is very specific. So I might actually do 43 first, and then I can move on to doing this because I know the answer to this one's going to be between 37 and 67. So let's do that. Let's do 43 first. Again, let's read from the beginning up to 43 and then answer this. The idea of bringing back extinct species holds obvious gee-whiz appeal and a respite from a steady stream of grim news. Yet with limited intellectual bandwidth and financial resources to go around, de-extinction threatens to divert attention from the modern biodiversity crisis. Okay, notice, just as a side note, this is about shrinking biodiversity crisis. If you look at the lines, it could, well, probably not going to be in here, but this might be the beginning of where we might find the answer to 41. According to a 2012 report from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, some 20,000 species are currently in grave danger of going extinct. Species today are vanishing in such great numbers, many from hunting and habitat destruction, that the trend has been called a sixth mass extinction, an event on par with such die-offs as the one that befell the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. A program to restore extinct species. Actually, let's take a step back. We want to go to line 37. Great. Species today are vanishing in such great numbers, many from hunting and habitat destruction, that the trend has been called a sixth mass extinction. So, great numbers, we're talking about big numbers, right? There's a lot of these animals that are vanishing, a lot of extinctions. So, lofty numbers? No, that doesn't really mean big. We're looking for big as in magnitude. Wonderful? Not really. It's not exactly a positive thing. Large numbers? Yeah. Intense numbers? I mean, at least it's capturing, I suppose, in some sense, the magnitude of the event, but you wouldn't say intense numbers. It's just not standard usage. Large numbers make sense, so we'll go with C. Let's go back to here. Now, we're looking from 37 to 41, so I'm going to bracket this. Sorry, from 37 to 67, so I'm going to bracket that off here. And I want to find the matter of shrinking biodiversity should primarily be considered what? Well, we actually read this a little bit, right? The species today are vanishing in such great numbers, there's your shrinking biodiversity, that the trend has been called a sixth mass extinction, an event on par with such die-offs as the one that befell the dinosaurs. A program to restore extinct species poses a risk of selling the public on a false promise that technology alone can solve our ongoing environmental woes, an implicit assurance that if a species goes away, we can snap our fingers and bring it back. So far, I'm going to do 44 before I answer this, just to make sure there's not an answer later. But I'm pretty certain that the answer is going to be somewhere in there. So let's move on. We want to look at 44, the reference to the black-footed ferret and the northern white rhino. And we want to know, what is the point? What does this reference do? So let's go back to here. Already, conservationists face difficult choices about which species and ecosystems to try to save, since they cannot hope to rescue them all. Many countries where poaching and trade in threatened species are rampant either do not want to give up their revenue or lack the wherewithal to enforce their own regulations. Against that backdrop, a costly and flamboyant project to resuscitate extinct flora and fauna in the name of conservation looks irresponsible. Should we resurrect the mammoth only to let elephants go under? Of course not. That is not to say that the de-extinction enterprise lacks merit altogether. Aspects of it could conceivably help save endangered species. For example, extinct versions of genes could be reintroduced into species and subspecies that have lost a dangerous amount of genetic diversity, such as the black-footed ferret and northern white rhino. So let's stop there. What are these examples of? They're examples of animals that have lost a dangerous amount of genetic diversity and could benefit from this de-extinction technology. So let's look at A. Emphasize a key distinction between extinct and living species. Do we see any key distinction being made here between extinct and living species? No. These aren't even, I mean, I guess they're living species. They're on the borderline of being extinct, but there's no distinction here. Account for types of animals whose numbers are dwindling. I mean, is that really why they're here? To account for types of animals whose numbers are... I mean, I suppose on some basic level this is, but again, it's more that these are examples of animals that have lost a dangerous amount of genetic diversity and could benefit from this technology. So B is just a bit too broad. We want to get a little bit more focused with what's actually going on here. Provide examples of species whose gene pools are compromised. Okay, so notice they've paraphrased, they've changed the words a little bit here, but this is exactly what we want. Gene pools is kind of like the diversity of their genes. And compromised means that they're damaged or weakened in some way. So indeed, if you've lost a dangerous amount of genetic diversity, you might say that the gene pools are compromised. So that is a good translation of what we read in the passage. Good paraphrase. Highlight instances of animals that have failed to adapt to new habitats. Doesn't say that they've failed to adapt to new habitats. We'll go with choice C. So we'll go back up to 41. Did we see anything beyond what we already read in terms of how the shrinking biodiversity should be seen? All we've seen in these lines and elsewhere is that this is a problem that needs to be solved and that de-extinction technology may not be the solution to it. Let's see what we have here. An historical anomaly. Doesn't say that it's historical anomaly. In fact, just the opposite, that this is something that's happened before. Right? It's like the 6th mass extinction, an event on par with the extinction of the dinosaurs. Global catastrophe, yeah, right, that fits in with this part. 6th mass extinction, vanishing in such great numbers, an event on par with such die-offs as the one that befell the dinosaurs. So this would be, indeed, a pretty big catastrophe, global catastrophe. Scientific curiosity, I mean, in some sense, it's probably a scientific curiosity, I guess, but it's not what the author mentions. So, political problem, they don't mention anything about politics, though it could be a political problem, it's just not what's mentioned here. So, answer to this one is B. Looking at the choices, A is going to be the lines that go with what we read to link with this question. Let's just check the rest. 42 to 45. A program to restore extinct species poses a risk of selling the public on a false promise that technology alone can solve our ongoing environmental woes, an implicit assurance that if a species goes away, we can snap our fingers and bring it back. Anything that maps up with global catastrophe, or even anything in the lines here? No, not really. 53 to 56. Against that backdrop, a costly and flamboyant project to resuscitate extinct flora and fauna in the name of conservation looks irresponsible. Okay, so again, saying that the de-extinction technology is probably a bad idea, but does that have anything to do with the problem of shrinking biodiversity itself? No. 65 to 67. Such investigations, however, should be conducted under the mantle of preserving modern biodiversity rather than conjuring extinct species from the grave. Well, they do mention biodiversity, which is nice, but they don't say anything about global catastrophe or, again, really any of these choices. It doesn't match onto anything. So we can get rid of D, and we go with choice A. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll. And you can find the link in the description below the video.